Hey, what's up? I'm Justin Johnson. Welcome to another episode of Live from the Guitar Loft. And this is actually a special, a little bit different episode. This one's brought to you by Guitar World and Kaiser Capos. And so that being the case, we're going to be talking about basically everything I've learned over the years about how to use a capo. Not only why you should use a capo and how to use a capo, but also when to use a capo. And not just, I think what a lot of people know about capos, but a lot of the things that I've learned over the years that can really make you sound a whole lot better, make you a lot more versatile when you're playing with other people, and basically give you an advantage over just, thinking about, I've got to fret these songs, I've got to, use my fingers. The capo's there to help you, and there's a lot of cool things you can do with it. So let's get into it. So I guess first off, let me talk a little bit about the capo that I'm using right now. This is from Kaiser Capos, and this is actually the 40th anniversary capo. So 40 years ago, back in 1980, Milton Kaiser invented this called the Quick Change capo, and quickly became one of the most famous, one of the most classic capo designs. This is basically what I think of when I think of a capo. And this one, again, is the 40th anniversary. They just came out with it. They're only making 2,020 of them for 2020. And just look great. They got that chrome finish on them. It's got a lighter tension spring, which is nice because one of the things you want with a capo is you want it to be able to push the strings down to where they are, pushing the strings down on the fret that you choose. But you don't want it to push so hard that it throws the strings out of tune. If you push down too hard, the strings are going to go sharp. And also over the years, if you just crank a capo too hard, or if the spring's too hard for the guitars and the strings you have, it can eventually start giving you a little fret wear. So that's one of the things to be aware of when you're getting a capo, and that's why I like this low tension spring also. If I had a 12 string, something like that, I might want to get one of their higher tension springs, or they've got some that are specifically for 12 strings, stuff like that. The other thing I like about the Kaiser capos is they're very consistent. They're all handmade. They're made here in America in the Lone Star State, Texas. And, since that's the case too, I think that I'm going to focus with some of my musical examples on some of the great musicians from Texas too. So do a little tribute to the Lone Star State here. Okay, so I'm going to start by teaching you basically some of the tips for how to properly use a capo. One of the first things you should know is that basically when you're using the capo, what you're doing is you're theoretically replacing your bar chord fingers. So, if I have, let's say, an open E chord shape down here, and I want to move that chord shape up the fretboard, let's say 1 fret to an F, I'm going to have to put my finger across all of these strings, push down on those, and then with my remaining fingers, I'm going to fret that chord shape. So there's F, then you can get F sharp, G, and so on. And so what's nice about the capo is that it saves you all of that work that you're doing with your index finger. Let's say I want to move that up to the 3rd fret. I can put the capo across the 3rd fret, and then I can just play with my muscle memory with my open chords as if I'm playing open, but now I've transposed basically an entire chord progression, whatever you're playing, up 3 half steps. This is important because let's say you're playing with a singer and you know a song open, but that singer sings a little bit higher and wants to go up to, let's say A instead of E. So instead of having to relearn chord shapes, having to transpose those chord shapes, you're kind of programmed always to play the song that you've practiced a certain way. And so you play that same song up in A now. Let's say they want to play it in B, and so on. You're using your same muscle memory, you're just transposing the key. And that is probably what most people use the capo for exclusively, is just to make, kind of like folk or singer-songwriter, a lot of material like that, accessible in any key without having to transpose things and use different chord shapes. But that is just the beginning of it. Another useful tip for using the capo is that you want to put the capo right behind the fret, right here. So if I'm putting it on the 3rd fret, I want to go right behind that 3rd fret. I don't want to be way back here. You want that tension to be pushing down right behind that fret. That gives you better contact with the fret and less likelihood that something's going to buzz. You don't want it to be on the fret, or you can hear some of that buzz. You want it to be right behind. And whenever I put the capo on, I like to test each string to make sure, sometimes if you're doing it wrong or in a hurry, you might have a string that's a little off center, something like that. You don't want to bend the strings. You want it to be nice and flat, straight down. Sounding nice and clean. Also, no matter what kind of capo you use, no matter what the context is or the tension of the spring, it's good to always tune after you put the capo on, especially, well, always, but especially in the studio when you're recording something. So let's say I'm in tune down here. I'm going to tune to the 3rd fret here. I've got the capo right there. It's looking good. So again, this is a good tension here. It's not pulling anything out of tune. But let's say it does. One of the tips is that you always want to tune a string down, flat, and then come up to the pitch. And the reason for that is if you tune the string down, if you go flat, you're going to start releasing tension back behind the capo. And so you want to, that tension can come out, let's say if you bend a string, and then suddenly the tuning is going to go flat. And this applies for any tuning, actually, not just when you're using the capo. You should always tune that way. So you should tune the note down and then up. And that'll help you always stay in tune longer when you're using the capo, or generally when you're playing in any context. One last tip, it's just something that I see some people do and you should always avoid, is when you're not using the capo. It's real common to put the capo up on your headstock. That's perfectly fine. That way it's always accessible, you can grab it. But do not put the capo here. What that's going to do is it's going to apply pressure to the strings back behind the nut. It's going to pull things out of tune, and it's just not good for the tuning and keeping things consistent. Put it over here, put it in your pocket, something. And then grab it again, put it back when you want it. So now that you know a little bit about how to use the capo, let's talk about when you should use a capo. One of the most common applications for the capo is basically when you're playing a song that open, but a singer wants to sing it in a different key. You should always transpose a song to where the singer feels comfortable, because you can move your positions on guitar easily, but the singer can't just shift out of their range. And so that's probably one of the most common applications for the capo. And it's very good. You can practice a song like the recording, but as soon as you get in a position where you're collaborating with someone or where you're jamming with someone, almost every time you're going to have to change keys. And it can be really confusing unless you've got a capo handy. You've got to rethink all your parts, and it just helps you out a lot in that. But in addition to that, there are also a lot of studio applications for when you might just want to shift chord changes to add some more life to a composition. And so let's just say, for example, you're playing a song in an open position, and it can be something like this. You keep playing that and you listen to the track and you think, man, I want that to sound fatter, you know what I mean? A lot of people might reach for a 12-string guitar or maybe double the 6-string part in the same register. And it's like, I just want something a little extra, something chimey. So what you do a lot of times is, let's say you record that part. And then you want to add a harmony part. A lot of times it's really good practice to move that part up so you can move it up the fretboard. Let's say from open, that's going to be an E chord to an E suspended chord. Let's do that up here on the 7th fret. And again, I'm going to tune really quick. in tune, perfect. And now instead of playing that kind of open E shape down here, I'm going to play the same chord with a different voicing up higher. And I'm going to play that one I just recorded. Let's hear them together. See how it just breathes new life into it? And one of the things that's great about doing this in the studio is, you know, it's not just the same part. It's not going to get muddy. If you keep doubling parts in the same register, it's going to end up getting too fat in that register. So if you're accompanying another acoustic guitar player or you're trying to double a part like that, pull out the capo, try it up a few frets, and you'll be amazed at what kind of fatness and life it brings to the song without getting muddy and getting in the way of the other parts. Another one of the most important contexts where you're going to want to have a capo ready is if you know riffs and know songs and the guitar part is highly dependent on using open strings. So let's take, for example, like a Texas shuffle, like Stevie Ray Vaughan's Pride and Joy. And we're doing an E right here. That's how I learned it. So that riff right there, you've got a bass line. Then every time in between those bass lines, you're doing an upstroke on these open strings. And so you need the open strings in order to get that Texas shuffle feel. If someone asked, you know, let's say you're playing with a keyboard player, horn player, something like that, vocalist, they want to shift the song up, let's say to F, then you're in trouble if you don't have a capo, because you could play the bass line, but you now can't play those open strings anymore. You'd be fretting, and the mechanics of that song, to be able to do that kind of riff together is pretty much impossible. But if you have the capo, all you have to do again to play your open string dependent riff is just shift that up, and now it's as if your nut just moved to the first fret. Another time when the capo comes in handy is when you're playing open tunings. Like for example, I'm in the open E tuning right now. And this is a great tuning for slide guitar, for blues slide. You know, like Johnny Winter, for example, one of my favorite slide players who used a lot of open D, open E, things like that. And I like it because it's great for the slide, but also because you can use a lot of open strings really creatively to serve a composition, whether it's solo guitar or whether you're playing with a band. But again, just like before when we're talking about open string dependent riffs, as soon as, let's say I want to take this from an E, but again, if for some reason in the song, because of either the singer or the other instrumentalist, something like that, or maybe it's just the feel of it, on the fretboard, I want to move that progression up to a different key, I can't just tune this tuning, just keep tightening those strings and make them go higher and higher. That's not going to work. Eventually, it's going to break strings and bend the neck, things like that. So your only option, again, is to pull out the capo. So you can play everything you played in that open position. You've basically just moved your open tuning up 3 frets here. Let's say this was open E down here. Now we're in open G, but all the patterns are the same. So again, this is great. You know, I play a lot of solo instrumental blues guitar, and if it wasn't for the capo, these tunings, I would only be able to play them open. I'd kind of be playing in the same few keys the entire performance. which, again, sometimes it's nice to be low, sometimes it's nice to have that low range, but a lot of times songs sound better and more interesting the further you go up the fretboard. It just adds interest, and changing keys in general adds a lot of interest both to albums and to performances. So if you have the capo handy, experiment with instrumental parts or parts that, sound good one way, move them up the fretboard and see how they sound. A lot of times it'll give you a whole different feel to the song. Okay, so let's dig a little bit deeper now. We've covered a lot of the most common uses for the capo, but there's one use that I hardly ever hear people talk about, but I think it's one of the best reasons to use a capo, and that is to just get the feel of your performance feeling the way you want it to on the fretboard. And so there's a lot of cool ways you can do that using the capo. And I'm going to use an example. This is where I learned a lot of this from, is from the guitarist Albert Collins, who's, of course, another great Texas blues musician. And what he does that I find really interesting is, he's playing lead most of the time, like a lot of those blues players do, electric blues players. But he's almost always using a capo. And for a while, I started wondering, why is he doing that? And started studying that technique. And I've found that he's a lot of times tuning the strings down so they feel a little more slack. They're easier to bend, but he's using the capo to transpose his open riffs to whatever key he wants. But it also lowers the action. When you put the capo down on the fret, your action is lower and it's easier to play. So let's say, I want to take that kind of Albert Collins approach. I'm going to play something in the key of A, but I want it to feel nice and slack, and I want that action to be low. It'll be super easy to play lead. So right now I'm in standard tuning, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to tune the standard tuning down a half step, and then I'm going to shift the guitar capo here up to the 6th fret. And so what's going to happen is, normally if I'm playing, this would be like B flat, but I'm going to tune everything down to an A. So my low E string is going to be an A now. In the next string here. All right, so again, I've retuned. I'm down a half step, and I'm playing in the key of A, which normally you'd put the capo here if it was standard tuning. But again, I've got slack strings now. They're a little looser, easier to play, and that action is significantly lower with the capo on than if I was open like that. So much easier to play like that. I love that feel, and it actually gives you, whether you're playing acoustic or electric, I think it just gives you a better kind of swat to the attack of the strings. It sounds a lot more bluesy than when you have tighter strings, and I think that's why a lot of those blues lead players tend to want to tune down a half step or a whole step. But again, with the capo, it really makes it a lot easier to play with other people while you're getting that feel you want on the guitar. All right, so one more advantage to using the capo is that, let's say you're playing a arrangement that's in the style of Travis picking, and, if we're going to stick with the theme of Texas musicians, there's some great Texas singer-songwriters that play in this style, like Townes Van Sant, Guy Clark, so on. Basically, what you're doing is you're playing a lot of open chords, and your thumb is playing a bass line. And then you're playing a melody with your other fingers. But let's say that riff right there, incredibly long stretch right there. I'm playing all of those different strings. That's tough to hit. And if I'm playing a solo guitar piece, and I'm having trouble hitting all the melody notes I want while playing the bass line that I want, while fretting the chords that are in between. An easy way to solve that problem is to grab the capo and move it up the fretboard. The higher you move it up the fretboard, the closer the frets get to one another and the easier the song is to play. So again, you want to make sure if it's a vocal song, you want to have it in a register of the singer, but if it's an instrumental song, you can really go wild with where you put the capo and do some incredible stretches without it actually breaking your fingers. So you can see that the widest stretch that I'm doing during that riff there, if I'm playing it up, capoing it up on the 7th fret, it's only about that far. If I were to do the same stretch open like I did before, it is almost impossible to do. And you really have to bend, and it's very uncomfortable to reach that down open. So again, using the capo not only allows you to be versatile when it comes to playing with other people, getting a song in the key that makes it good for a singer or a piano player or a horn player, it also allows you to get the guitar to feel the way you want it to when you're playing lead, when you're playing rhythm. It allows you to play riffs that would normally be impossible to play down here where the frets have wider spacing. Play them up here, it's a lot easier. Thicken up your arrangements in the studio or when you're playing with other guitar players by moving songs up a register. It can really open up new doors as far as the tone, the feel, and the style of your playing. And so basically it's just a very versatile tool, and I hope that this video helped give you some ideas for how you can apply it to your playing style too. So again, thanks for watching. Thanks to Guitar World and Kaiser Capo, and see you next time.